Maybe just to give you a little bit more background about myself, I'm a licensed customs broker. We provide brokerage services to companies all over the United States, but we specialize in the Foreign Trade Zone program. We're consultants that work with regions such as March JPA here in the Inland Empire, other grantees all over the country to help promote and expand the Foreign Trade Zone program, as well as help them manage compliance of the program. And then we also work individually with distributors, importers, exporters, and manufacturers to help them maximize the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program and also manage their compliance of the program once they're approved. So we definitely provide turnkey services related to the Foreign Trade Zone, which of course is our specialty today. And so today I'm going to give you a presentation that really talks about what the program's all about. We'll explain the infrastructure and give you a really good understanding. And then at the end of the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to interject throughout the presentation or even afterwards. Okay? Best way to describe a foreign trade zone is a duty-free island. It's essentially your warehouse anywhere in the United States, and you get benefits to bring domestic goods, foreign goods, where you're able to do everything from manufacturing, exporting, exhibition, you name it. What you're doing in your warehouse or your manufacturing facility today can be done in a foreign trade zone. Some of the best analogies would be similar to a bonded warehouse with a lot more benefits. But what's important about the foreign trade zone is it's not just in one area of the country. It's not just at the ports of entry. The foreign trade zone is literally wherever your warehouse happens to be, whether that's the Inland Empire, whether that's Northern California, whether that's across the country. Some of the key benefits of why companies use the foreign trade zone is to create and retain jobs, stimulate the economy, and promote international trade. The program was actually developed back in 1934. It was part of the New Deal to help get us out of the Great Depression. So again, think about it. Back in 1934, creating and retaining jobs was key. Stimulating our economy to get us out of that Great Depression was even more important. And then expanding our industries worldwide through international trade was the beginning of what we started doing back in 1934. But imagine today we're in 2020. We're already a global economy. We are dependent on trading with the rest of the world to manufacture and sell goods or to receive goods from all over the world. So it's even more important today that we're utilizing the foreign trade zone to help us manage that expansive economy we have called the global economy. So who benefits from the foreign trade zone? Literally everyone in your supply chain benefits from this program. This is the user, the importer, the exporter, the manufacturer are the most obvious direct benefits of the program. But even the truckers benefit, the customs brokers, the trading companies, the steamship lines. Because when an importer or an exporter saves money, they grow their business, which grows their volume, which means there's more containers on vessels now, which means there's more needs to move those goods across the country with the truckers. It means your customs broker is now going to be filing more entries. So there's an indirect benefit or a direct benefit for everybody within your supply chain. Some of the most common industries, as you can see here, we've listed the top 9, which is alcohol, auto, apparel, textiles, tobacco, pharmaceuticals, energy. These are the most popular industries simply because they have high value, heavily regulated by the U.S. government or other government agencies, or they have high tariff rates. But every industry benefits from the Foreign Trade Zone program. The toy industry, the plastic industry, anything you can imagine, every industry can benefit from this program as long as it does one thing first, and it must import something first, whether that's a raw material, a component, or finished good. Once you've done that, there's a potential benefit for any industry to use this program. A good example of that would be the toy industry. By the way, no toys are made in the United States anymore. At least 99% of all toys are made outside the United States. Most toys are made of plastic, so their value's low. All toys are duty-free. So why would anybody use a foreign trade zone to import toys? But when you import a toy, you're still paying administrative fees to U.S. Customs. You still adhere to certain regulatory requirements, like the Child Safety Act. But if I'm an importer that imports toys destined for Mexico, I don't want to have to adhere to U.S. standards because they're not going to enter the U.S. market. I want to adhere to Mexican standards. Companies will import those toys, bring them into a foreign trade zone where they don't have to adhere to U.S. government standards. They'll then move them inbound directly into Mexico. By doing that, they maintain a more efficient supply chain. They minimize their costs. So even in an industry where it's low value, no duties or taxes acquired, and low value or low volume even, you can use the foreign trade zone to benefit yourself. Probably one of the best things you can get from my presentation today is be creative, think outside the box. And today we're going to talk about that a little bit. There's two different types of foreign trade zones. There's the general purpose zone, which is the most commonly type of foreign trade zone. So this is your industrial parks, your convention centers, your third-party logistics companies. So small businesses may not use their own warehouse. They may want to use a public warehouse. A public warehouse or a distribution warehouse would become a general purpose zone. It's probably the cheapest way to become a foreign trade zone. The costs aren't as high, but it's also the quickest way to become a foreign trade zone is through the general purpose zone process. But there are some limitations. For example, there's no retail allowed. So that means that a consumer can't walk into your foreign trade zone and buy something. It has to clear customs first, and then it can be delivered to that consumer. Or it can be delivered to the retail store or to the wholesale store where then it can be purchased. But again, general purpose zones are generally for basic distribution or public warehousing services. Here's examples of companies that are currently have general purpose zones. There's general purpose zones in Retro Sound is actually a manufacturer. They're a small, low-level manufacturer that imports components to take classic car radios and upgrade them to have Bluetooth, to have XM radio, and so on. So while you're driving that 1960s beautiful car of yours, you now have today's technology to make it that much more enjoyable. Other companies, Las Vegas has plenty of general purpose zones. Here in the Inland Empire, there's plenty as well, and so on. So there's a lot of opportunity with the general purpose zone. The other type of foreign trade zone is the subzone. The subzone is essentially for that high-level manufacturer, the automobile industry. Most automobile companies are foreign trade zones. Most oil refineries are subzones and foreign trade zones as well. And so again, you have more flexibility. The cost is a little bit higher, but the benefit is also significantly higher. You still aren't allowed to conduct retail trade in a subzone. So again, it has to clear customs first. But typically it's the private importer that's also manufacturing is that subzone. Okay. What are some of the different companies that are subzones right now? As you can see, largely automobile manufacturing, electronics companies that may manufacture or distribute, and so forth. So these are some examples of companies that are subzones. So how does the program work? How is the program managed? Well, first of all, the program was actually developed by the Department of Commerce. What's so important is the Department of Commerce is one of the few agencies that's pro-business, right? They developed the program. They submitted it to be approved by Congress and also to be signed by the President. In doing so, there's three entities that manage and interpret this program. One is the Department of Commerce, two is the Department of Homeland Security, and three is the Department of Treasury. You'll notice I didn't mention U.S. Customs, and that's key in this program. If you look at other programs around the world, like maquiladora programs in Mexico, bonded warehouse programs in Canada and Europe, or free trade zones throughout Asia, the one entity that manages those programs is their customs agency. In the United States, Customs has only one job here, and that's to enforce the program. They can't interpret the program, they can't change the program, they can only enforce the program. Why is that so important? Imagine you own your own business, and I came to you and I said, tomorrow I'm going to cut your revenue in half, and I'm going to double your cost of doing business. This is what we've asked U.S. Customs to do. This is why it's so important that they don't get to interpret and manage the program, because obviously they would want to change those rules to protect their interests, which we can understand that. But this is the role Customs plays, is they get to enforce the program, which makes it so unique, because this program is going to help us defer duty, eliminate duty, minimize customs fees, which we'll get into. But the Foreign Trade Zone Board is a small group of individuals that administer the program in Washington, D.C. They cannot understand and manage every foreign trade zone program throughout the United States. So what they do is they issue grants of authority, such as March JPA here in Riverside is the grantee that manages the foreign trade zone and promotes the foreign trade zone. So they act on behalf of the Foreign Trade Zone Board and do that regionally. Typically, a grantee is a city or county or a public utility or nonprofit association that manages or receives the grant of authority to manage and represent the program. But again, we can't expect that entity that's regionally based to understand what happens in every single warehouse in every corner of their region. Plus, they don't necessarily always have the expertise and understand every regulation set by U.S. Customs. So they issue operators agreements for either subzones or general purpose zones to be able to manage themselves and make sure that they're in full compliance at all times and maximize the benefits of the program. So this is why you'll see the Foreign Trade Zone Board, then it's the grantee, and then it's the individual operator. And Customs' job is to enforce all those different levels and making sure those companies or entities are following those compliance requirements. So where has this program been and where is it going today? As you can see here, over the past 20 plus years, this program has exponentially grown significantly. Back in 1970, there was only 10 of these zones. There's now well over 300 of them as of 2017. There's over 450,000 jobs have been created through this program. Still, over 60% of the zones has domestic product. So it's important that this isn't a program that displaces jobs, but this is a program that creates and retains jobs. This is a program that helps companies not leave the United States and take their business abroad. This is a program that helps small business grow, compete in the global market by being able to manufacture and distribute with financial benefits. So it's definitely not just for importing goods, it's also for domestic goods. So a lot of manufacturers will use domestic and foreign products. So you see both types of products in a foreign trade zone. The other one that's of significance is over $500 billion of goods imports into the United States annually. So this isn't just a small program anymore. This is a program that is creeping on $1 trillion worth of goods that go through foreign trade zones. And then most importantly, because it's about exports, it's about selling that product abroad. Over $87 billion annually exports to other countries when using a foreign trade zone. It allows companies to save money, manufacture in the United States, and then sell those products around the world. So what are some examples of this happening? So first of all, what can you do in a foreign trade zone? Like I said, anything you're doing in your warehouse today can be done in a foreign trade zone. Whether that's storage, manipulation, repackaging, e-commerce, pick and pack, kitting, manufacturing. I can destroy my goods. I can literally do anything within reason what can be done in your warehouse can also be done in a foreign trade zone. So the question some people have is, why would I ever destroy my own product in my own warehouse? But if you import a product and it doesn't meet the quality control standards, you don't want to give that product away because it has your brand. If you give that product away and it's poor quality, you hurt your brand. By destroying that product, I'm able to cut my losses, instead of shipping it back to the country of origin where it accrues more costs and more delay, I can now destroy it. I ensure that no one will use my product that is poor in quality, which would hurt my brand. And by destroying it, I'm able to minimize costs. So that's why companies may destroy some of their product in their facility. Here's an example of an automobile. This is a Lamborghini that was imported into the United States. It was brought directly into a foreign trade zone. The importer did not post a bond, did not pay any duties, did not adhere to any customs regulations or government regulations. While that Lamborghini was sitting in a foreign trade zone, they then removed the passenger seat, added decals to the car, and then temporarily removed it from the zone under bond so it could participate in an exhibition race. At the end of that race, they brought it right back to the foreign trade zone. Again, the importer incurred no customs fees, posted no bond, and did not adhere to any government regulations, because then they exported the vehicle right back to Italy. So it's an example of being creative, where I can test product that outside the foreign trade zone. I can do further processing to my product outside the foreign trade zone without incurring those fees as well. So as long as it returns back to the foreign trade zone, I don't have any costs associated. Liquor and spirits. The unique thing about liquor and spirits is it's one of those products that may come to you damaged that you can't fix, right? We can't repair a broken bottle of tequila. We can repair a lot of different other hard goods. So in the foreign trade zone, if I brought that trailer of tequila and I determined 5% of that product was damaged because the driver got in an accident or the driver hit a bump that caused damage to that tequila, I can now bring it into my foreign trade zone, determine what's broken and I cannot sell. I can then file documentation with customs for destruction, which means I never pay the duty and tax on the damaged product. So in the case when you're dealing with spirits or different liquor, the duties and taxes are significant, and so I can avoid paying duties on something that I cannot sell. So it's another advantage of the foreign trade zone. We see more and more companies that are importing. Yes, sir.
How do the excise taxes on alcohol, tobacco, are they affected?
They are. Actually, I have a slide, a couple more slides later, and I'll explain that because it's definitely a good point. The excise tax is significant when it comes to liquor and tobacco, and there's definitely some FTZ benefits on bringing that product through a foreign trade zone. Here's an example of herbal supplements that do adhere to FDA requirements, but this herbal supplement happened to come into the United States without the proper labeling. So instead of clearing customs, being non-compliant with U.S. customs, having my product seized and receiving big fines and being targeted by customs on future shipments, I avoided all of that by routing it into a foreign trade zone where I could then apply the correct labeling, meet the compliance requirements, clear customs, pay my duty, and be in full compliance. Thus, I'm still able to deliver my product on time to my customer, and I don't incur any unnecessary fines and penalties. Here's an example of TVs. We're seeing more and more of these TVs coming into the United States. One of the requirements is that these TVs must have an English owner's manual. In this example, these TVs came in, they were rerouted to the United States, and they did not have English owner's manuals. If they would have entered the commerce and cleared customs, they would have been seized by customs, duties would have applied. Bringing it through a foreign trade zone, they switched out the owner's manual, met those compliance requirements, and now are able to deliver it to the client with no additional costs. So again, I hope I'm getting your juices moving and you're realizing I got to be creative. I got to not just do the same thing every time, but think how I can be more creative, maximize my benefits, and take advantage of the foreign trade zone. Again, there's stories after stories on all of these examples. As you can see here, even tanks have come into foreign trade zones, raw materials, electronics or robotics, equipment, and finished goods. But the last story I want to talk about is going to be satellites. Satellites are manufactured here in the United States, but they're manufactured with components that come from all over the world, from the nuts and bolts, the technology, the wiring, the paneling, and so on. There's a company up in San Francisco that manufactures satellites in a foreign trade zone. The advantage there is they don't have to pay duty on anything while they're manufacturing it. Once they finish manufacturing it, they can then test the satellite. Once they test it, the next step is to move that satellite to another foreign trade zone. So I'm not paying any duty yet, right? Because I moved it to another foreign trade zone. The foreign trade zone they moved it to happened to be Cape Canaveral. And what do we do at Cape Canaveral? We send satellites into space. Well, the U.S. law says if you export something, you don't have to pay the duty. So by exporting the goods out of the United States, they eliminated all duty on the satellites. The law doesn't stipulate that it has to export to another country, just that it has to export. So in this case, they exported it to space, eliminated all the duty from all of those components. So the worst case scenario, though, of course, is if that satellite comes into my backyard, I'm in trouble with customs, right? But fortunately, satellites usually burn up on our atmosphere, so we don't have to worry about that. Yes, ma'am.
I got a question for you. If your current business are sitting on an enterprise zone or tax opportunity zone, and you're gonna expand to, let's say, import and export, are you allowed to get both of the credits, the FTC plus the OTC?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, we've seen a lot of different economic development corporations or regions will try to layer different tax benefits or different programs by the federal and state government to create additional advantages. So for example, if an opportunity zone is layered where your foreign trade zone is, then you get both. And again, the nice thing about the foreign trade zone is if you move to an opportunity zone or an IHUB zone, you can move the foreign trade zone program to that zone as well. The foreign trade zone program in its area is not fixed. It's flexible. So if I want to move to an area that is an opportunity zone, I can do that. And the program moves with you. So it isn't something that you're forced to stay in a certain area when it comes to the foreign trade zone. So you have that flexibility.
One more question. Do you have a limitation on the time frame? Because for tax opportunity zone is 5 years, but for the FTC.
So the great thing about the FTZ, which I'll talk a little bit more later, is that there is no time frame restriction. For example, there's companies right now that have foreign product in their foreign trade zone for 50 years, for 20 years, for 10 years. There is no expectation that you have to remove it within a certain amount, certain time frame. So you definitely have that ability. Now, why is that there's no restriction? A foreign trade zone is outside customs jurisdiction and it's outside the commerce of the United States. So it doesn't have to adhere to a lot of those local or state requirements. So you have that advantage to do that. And then maybe to answer what everyone's thinking is why would anybody keep product in their FTZ for 50 years? Well, a lot of commodities that are traded on the London Metal Exchange or other commodity trade groups can keep it in a foreign trade zone, and that product can change hands multiple times and still remain in the foreign trade zone until that product is finally traded to a manufacturer, and that manufacturer then may use the product for their manufacturing facility. And in that case, they can move it to their FTZ manufacturing facility and then see even more benefit. But that's why you see some companies that have product for a long time is because it's being traded on a not a stock exchange, but being traded like on the London Metal Exchange, a commodity. But again, so far we've talked about reactive benefits. We've talked about how to avoid unnecessary fines and penalties by using the foreign trade zone. We've talked about any manipulation or manufacturing you may do. But at the end of the day, we invest in the foreign trade zone to save money, to be proactive, to lower our costs, is usually why companies will use the foreign trade zone. So we'll talk about cash flow benefits, which is key for small business, manufacturing, cost of money or a duty elimination for exports, and then also different tax exemptions, like you had mentioned about liquor and tobacco. So duty deferral. This means I bring my product into my foreign trade zone. I avoid those duties, and in today's environment, I'm able to avoid those Chinese tariffs. by deferring it and bringing it into a foreign trade zone. While the goods are in the foreign trade zone, I pay no duty, I pay no tax, I pay no tariffs. I only pay when it leaves. And the nice thing is I can withdraw a portion of those goods little by little. So if I'm using e-commerce in my foreign trade zone and I'm shipping 10 boxes, I can only pay duty on the 10 boxes. I don't have to pay duty on the entire shipment. So I definitely have that cash flow benefit to only pay duty on what I actually ship into the commerce. So I can defer those duties in a significant way. Here's an example of American Barbell is a company in Las Vegas that's currently going through the foreign trade zone application process. And so they're seeing a $43,000 savings just in cash flow. That doesn't include all the other benefits they're going to receive as well. They've got about $250,000 savings coming to them once they implement the program. But in the cash flow benefit, you see this is $43,000. Duty reduction. So this is the manufacturing benefit. This means, and a car is a really easy way to explain it. I import automobile parts and components into my foreign trade zone. By doing that, I would normally have a duty rate of 5%. I'm able to defer that 5% duty on those parts. While it's in my foreign trade zone, it's not just sitting there, I'm turning it into an automobile. So I'm turning it into a vehicle, which is a finished product. And now once I've got that automobile finished and tested, I'm ready to send it to a dealership. That's the only time I pay duties. And I only pay duties on that finished product. So the finished duty rate of an automobile is an average of 2.5%. So by manufacturing in a foreign trade zone, I've reduced my duty by 50%. And if you think about it, we've actually worked with some automobile companies. Reducing 50% of duty represents their labor for manufacturing those vehicles. So it's a huge benefit for companies that manufacture. Yes, sir.
Just a curiosity. So if you do it backwards, like you bring in a finished good and then you disassemble, and then you try to sell it, so you're still paying 5% duty, or you're still paying?
It depends on what the duty rate of those automobile parts are. So this is just a hypothetical. The average for parts is 5%, but you're correct. If I imported a finished vehicle and then wanted to take it apart, then whatever that finished product on that car was, and then I unassembled it, I may be paying 5%. So in that case, we obviously don't want to do that, right? So we could still bring it into the foreign trade zone to defer duty, but you can actually set your duty rate in stone, which is called a zone status of privilege foreign, so that you put that 2.5%, you've already got it in stone, it's in place. So even when I unassemble it, I'm still paying the 2.5%. So again, these are the flexibilities that the FTZ program has to help you save money. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. Yes, sir.
So basically for that program, it really depends on how you bring in the product in order to take the benefits of that program.
Correct, yes, correct. Also keep in mind, when I import these components and I make that automobile, I'm not just making it with foreign components, right? I'm also using U.S. components. But when I pay the 2.5% on the finished good, it's not on the total value of the vehicle, it's only on the foreign value of the vehicle. So what foreign components did I bring in? What is that value? I paid 2.5% only on that. So the domestic components I brought in, I'm not paying any duty or tax on. Okay? So here's an example of Hoi Fong Foods, which we all are familiar with Sriracha. They import one ingredient, and that one ingredient gives them a $1.6 million savings. Obviously, they do it in large volumes. There was an 11% duty rate on that one ingredient, and then the finished product had it was a 29.8%, and then they reduced it down to a 6.4% duty. So they see a significant savings in doing this in a foreign trade zone. And then lastly, duty elimination. The nice thing about duty elimination, if a lot of you have drawback programs, a drawback program is a program that you pay duties to U.S. Customs and then you decide to export it and you ask Customs for that duty back. The average process for that drawback program is approximately 6 months or less to get your duty back. You only get 99% of it back. And usually that pesky broker is going to charge a percentage of your savings. So you're not even going to get 99% back. You're going to probably get 95% or more back, or less back. By using the foreign trade zone, since you're not giving customs the duty on the front end, you're holding on to that duty. You'd never have to file for drawback because you never paid customs, as long as you export the goods directly from your foreign trade zone. And so in this case, I can import or manufacture an automobile with foreign components. And then if I export it to another country, I never pay any duties. I never file entry with U.S. Customs. And I see 100% savings on that duty. So this benefit is what's really helping a lot of companies that are importing from China right now and are subject to the tariffs. They're looking at their business model and say, well, I only export 10% of my volume. Well, 10% of their volume at 25% duty rate becomes a lot of money using a foreign trade zone, and that helps them offset some of their costs to be able to manage these tariffs with China and the United States right now. So it's definitely become a popular program in this environment. And then here's a footwear company that exports as well, and you can see here by just a 10% duty rate on their footwear on average, they're seeing $750,000 savings. And that's just eliminating that duty completely. They're not doing anything different in their warehouse. They're still importing the footwear. They're still managing their inventory the same way as they've always done before, but now they never pay the duty on on this portion of the goods that are actually exported. And then back to your question, Joe, excise tax. So if you import liquor and tobacco, they're the only two commodities that have a tax on them when you import them. That tax is pretty much up to 80% of the product. So hard liquor has close to 80% tax rate in addition to the duty. Now I will tell you the duty is typically very low, but again, depending on your value and your volume, it's still a savings, but the tax is really what drives companies to import their liquor into foreign trade zones. The nice thing about storing your liquor in a foreign trade zone is because you're outside customs jurisdiction and you're outside the commerce, you don't have to adhere to ABC requirements. You don't need additional permitting requirements while you're storing it, but once you send it to a distributor, then your distributor has to meet those ABC requirements. So you're able to see a lot of savings. Where we've seen this extremely popular is for small importers that are importing tequila from Mexico. There's a significant increase of businesses in Mexico that are importing tequila. By importing into the U.S., they're trying to make a name for their brand. They're trying to implement themselves into the U.S. market or abroad, and they can use a foreign trade zone for cash flow benefits while they're trying to find a distributor that will take their product, or while they're trying to find a retailer to take their product. So the foreign trade zone has been great for small business in the liquor industry. One of the things is tequila especially is enormously popular in Asia. So we're seeing more and more tequila is being imported into the U.S., goes into foreign trade zones, and then gets exported to Asia where there's a demand for tequila right now. So a lot of different ways you can be creative and take advantage of the benefits. So here's an example. This is a unique thing in that Molson is a company that distributes Miller Genuine Draft, but they distribute it in Canada. So they put their own name on the beer, but it's actually Miller beer. They purchase it from Miller at their manufacturing facility in Irwindale. They put it directly into a foreign trade zone. By doing that, they avoid the IRS tax. So this is a product that isn't imported. This is a product that's manufactured in the U.S. And so the foreign trade zone program says if you manufacture liquor in the U.S., you can avoid that IRS tax by putting it in a foreign trade zone. If you eventually enter it into the commerce, you then have to pay the IRS tax. But if you export the liquor, then you eliminate it completely. And so since Molson distributes all throughout Canada, they will bring all of this beer into a foreign trade zone. They'll put it on a vessel. They'll ship it up to Prince Rupert or another port, and then it actually distributes throughout Canada. So it avoids that IRS tax because it's not intended for the US market. So what other financial benefits have value? The harbor maintenance fee is a fee that Customs collects on behalf of the seaports. This is a small fee in the sense it's only 0.125%. But if I'm a company like General Electric that is in City of Industry and I do an average of 140 containers a week and I'm paying an average of $30,000 to $40,000 in value, you start to add up with that value and volume, your harbor maintenance fee's gotten pretty big now. Well, under the foreign trade zone, I can defer that on a quarterly basis. So it's a cash flow benefit. But again, if it fits, there's definitely some advantages to deferring that for cash flow purposes. And then probably the program that really put things on the map for the foreign trade zone program was in 2000. Prior to 2000, I could bring goods in, I could manufacture them in a foreign trade zone, I could distribute for cash flow benefits, but that was about it. In 2000 is when the weekly entry program came into play, and this was approved by President Clinton and signed into law. And this essentially allowed distributors to see significant savings on the merchandise processing fee set by U.S. Customs. This is an administrative fee that Customs charges to everybody that imports something into the U.S. You have to pay a merchandise processing fee. What's unique about this fee is it's 0.3464%, which essentially means if I import at a minimum, a minimum for that fee is $25. A maximum for that fee is $519. So what does that mean? That means if I import a shipment where the value of my shipment is $150,000, I've hit the cap of $519. Well, if I'm doing, in this example here, 500 entries a year, that means, and they all cap out at $140,000 in value, I pay a cap of $519 times 500 entries. And I apologize, about 3 or 4 months ago, the cap was 508. It's gone up since then. So that's why I'm referencing 519. But even in that hypothetical, there's a $242,000 savings by a company that imports 500 shipments a year. So you can see that can be significant. But if I use the weekly entry, I only file 1 entry a week, which means I only file 52 entries a year, which means I'm only paying U.S. Customs that merchandise processing fee of $25,000 a year. So there's over a $217,000 savings. I've done nothing different in my warehouse. My supply chain does exactly what it's always done, but now I'm seeing a savings. So let me show you what it looks like without the foreign trade zone. My goods still come from my foreign supplier. They come to the port of discharge. I file my entry with my broker. Once it clears customs, it moves to my distribution center. Once it gets to my distribution center, it's eventually going to move to a retail facility or be delivered to the consumer. If I do 25 shipments a week, that means I'm filing 25 entries a week. That means I'm paying a merchandise processing fee 25 times at $508. That's a $12,000 cost just on the merchandise processing fee. There's still duties, there's still taxes, there's still broker fees, there's still transportation fees, right? So it's just taking one piece. Now, in a foreign trade zone environment, it still comes from my foreign supplier, still comes to the port of entry, but instead of filing an entry, I file a form so I can send it to my distribution center that happens to be a foreign trade zone. From my foreign trade zone, I now ship out my product on a regular basis, like I had done before, but now I'm filing 1 entry a week. So that means I'm only paying $508 for that entire week. That means my cost annually is my savings annually is $12,000 a week or $600,000 a year. So you see, this is enormously beneficial for companies that have high volume and high activity. Imagine I'm conducting e-commerce in my facility. I'm shipping out small packages, maybe 100 a day. I'm not going to file 100 entries. I'm going to file 1 weekly entry that allows me to continue to ship at a fast pace without worrying about compliance or duties or paperwork. Okay? The great thing about this is all done with no what am I trying to say here? No cost to your supply chain. So that just-in-time concept still is there. There is no slowdown. There is no paperwork problems. Everything's managed electronically in a paperless environment. So you actually are able to meet your customers' demands on their time frame while you're saving a whole lot of money if you have the volume to support it. Okay? So here's an example. Got to fix that. Of Skechers. Skechers is, of course, here in Moreno Valley. Skechers sees a significant amount of savings just on the weekly entry. Their average is about $1 million a year on the weekly entry. They also see other advantages through cash flow benefits, duty elimination, and so forth. But they use the weekly entry. They've been a foreign trade zone for at least 10 plus years. And they're seeing all of these different advantages. And like we showed you an example of ASICS is another footwear company doing the same thing down in Orange County. Okay. Here's another example. DNP Electronics is an electronics company down in San Diego that realized the same savings or a little bit higher. So what other benefits that we've talked about, all the stuff that really has teeth to it, but there's other benefits to keep in mind. First of all, there's greater flexibility in the Foreign Trade Zone program. Ease of paperwork, everything but one process is automated. And even that one process that's automated, you can set up as an annual permit so you're not having to file it manually every time. So everything's in a paperless environment. This is one of the few programs that does require investment. There are fees associated to participating in this program. So it's important that you understand what those fees are, what your savings is. So you can do a landed cost determination on, am I going to save $50,000 a year? Is it going to cost me $20,000 a year? So that it makes sense. So we do that at no cost. We have one questionnaire. It's a one-page questionnaire that helps us gather the information to do that analysis and provide you with all of that information. We'll also sit down with you at no cost to you to help further educate you on the program and go over that analysis for you. And so that's definitely something we've offered, especially with Riverside County and ETAP, as well as SBA.
I am Margaret with BGI Worldwide Logistics.